Recording. The Special Education Alliance is excited to bring you our speaker tonight, Diane Perry with the Peel Center. Jody and Amy will track questions in the chat for Diane tonight. And you're up, Diane. Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And this is not my first rodeo with this group, so I'm thankful to be here tonight and bring you a wonderful topic. And so I think, Jody, were you going to share my slides? That would be great.
Yeah,
And as she's pulling them up, just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I am my role at the Peel Center is a family resource specialist, and I've been at the Peel Center for over 10 years, but I've been doing this work for probably over 30 years because my son, David, who is 32, brought me into the world of special education. He was born with a disability. So I always like to give him credit for giving me my career because I knew nothing about special education, disabilities, and nothing when I had him when he was born. So I've been exposed to many things, and I was guided by a lot of other families and professionals in my journey with David. So and I continue to learn too from families, but I've always felt it was important that I give back to families as well, the knowledge that was given me to keep that going. So that's a little bit more about me, and I'll probably throw in a story or two sometimes. David always gives me permission to talk about him, so I might throw in a personal story here and there as well throughout my journey. So the Peel Center, what the Peel stands for is Parent Education and Advocacy and Leadership, and we are statewide, so we serve all 67 counties throughout Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. Today, just some fast facts about the NOREP, the Notice of Recommended Educational Placement, and PWN, Prior Written Notice. So I was chatting with Jody and Reba and had mentioned to them because I asked them about their everybody who's here tonight. And I know sometimes we get people from various other districts and sometimes out of state as well. So I just wanted to give one of those fast facts that the NOREP is a document specific to Pennsylvania. Prior written notice is in IDEA. You do have to give prior written notice. It's in your procedural safeguards and things like that. But the NOREP is specific to Pennsylvania. So just a little fast fact about that. Next slide, please. So thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. A couple of the names look a little familiar to me, so I'm glad to see some good friends in the audience as well. And but during our time here together, as Reba already said, everyone I think is muted, so please use the chat to make any comments or questions. I'll try and answer some of the questions throughout, but there will be time at the end as well that I can address questions. And what we can do then is take the recording off as well, so that if you don't want your question recorded, on the recording, we can just do open discussion at that point as well. But if there's any personal details, maybe we could refrain from that. And if you do need to talk to me one-on-one afterwards, I'll be putting my information in the chat at the end as well. So, and then, okay, next slide. The mission at the Peel Center. So the mission of the Peel Center is to educate and empower families to ensure that children, youth, and young adults with disabilities and special healthcare needs lead rich, active lives as full members of their schools and communities. And we do that in many different ways. So if you have an opportunity to go to our website, I really encourage you to do that, because you'll see a whole plethora of different ways that we service to families. So obviously we do trainings like this on various topics. And if you go to our website, there is a list of various topics that you can choose from. And or if there is a topic, we can always tailor it to your group as well, like we did tonight as well. So, and now we have a new training as well, specific just to the NOREP and the prior written notice, which is very cool. But we also have archived webinars that we've put on. Our director of the PTI, which is what the Peel Center is, a parent training and information center in Pennsylvania. She did a session last week. It was like, oh gosh, couple hundred people on there. And it was specific to what's going on within the federal government and how that might be affecting education. So if you were not on it, feel free to go to our website and check our archived webinars for that session. It was very powerful and very informative. And I encourage anyone to take a look at that. But I stated just a few minutes ago that we are what's called a PTI, a Parent Training and Information Center in Pennsylvania. And what that means is that in IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the PTI is mandated in IDEA. And we are also not only mandated, but we are also federally funded as well. So in Pennsylvania, it is the Peel Center. But if you live in a different state, there is a different PTI for your state. And we can always help you and direct you if you live in a different state, or if you decide to move to another state, you know, who that PTI is. Every PTI does very similar work in accordance, very similar to what our mission is and what I just read. So, and we also have a youth department too. So, because we do try and reach out to youth in schools as well. We have youth leadership academies, and we offer one-on-one assistance through all of that as well. And that's what I do in my position. I do offer individual assistance with families, ensuring that they understand their rights, the processes, the forms, anything that has to do with special education, and help them and guide them through that process. And work collaboratively with the school districts as well to navigate all of that. Next slide, please. So today, the objectives for today is going to try and help you understand your options and the timelines before signing that NOREP and prior written notice. To be aware of the dispute resolution processes and alternate dispute resolution. And this is only if, you know, the school and the family, does not agree. And if you don't agree, you have options. So it's to ensure that you understand that. And then understanding what that connection is between the IEP and the NOREP and the prior written notice. So next slide, please. So these are what's called the NOREP, and the prior written notice is considered a consent form. A lot of times you're giving consent. You have to agree or you disagree with whatever the school district might be proposing, So it's an opportunity for you to really look at, do you know what you're signing? And so that's the process I'm going to take you through this evening. Next slide, please. So I first wanted to start a little bit about the procedural safeguards. I talked about that just a minute ago. And the procedural safeguards, as many of you know, if you have, if your child has an IEP, because I'm not sure if everybody here joining, or if you work in the field as well, and you want to understand, the forms a little better. So the IEP, which is an individualized education plan, when you get that IEP, or when the district is offering some kind of change or offering, something different with the IEP, it could be that you're just getting an IEP, you have an evaluation, your child qualifies for special education. So there's these the little, it's a booklet. It's almost like a booklet because there's quite a bit, right? and they're your procedural safeguards. So the district is to provide you with the procedural safeguards at least once per year, which is usually at your annual IEP meeting. But they do offer your procedural safeguards throughout the year, especially if you're having many meetings or for any reason you're meeting. They do need to offer you the procedural safeguards, but they actually have to give them to you at least one time per year. And I'm going to go through just a couple slides to kind of highlight what is the purpose of procedural safeguards. And one of the purposes is to protect parental rights. These make sure that the parents are informed of their rights under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And in IDEA, that is what some of the language that's in there. Parents are to be informed decision makers. So that's really the purpose of why we at the Peel Center want to make sure that families know and understand what they're reading, what their, rights are, so that they can be informed decision makers in making these decisions. And so, because many times, and I'll tell you, we get a lot of calls at the Peel Center, and I'll say to a family, well, did they give you the NOREP, or did they give you the prior written notice? And they're like, well, what's that? And so I have to describe it, and that's fine, because it's a lot, right? That the IEPs it's a large document. You got evaluations, you got procedural safeguards, you got all this paperwork. So it's a lot to navigate. And I remember even navigating it when I was a family member, walking through all that. So it's important just to have these nice reminders of what they are for and what do you use them for. Next slide, please. Another reason for the procedural safeguards is to ensure school accountability. There are certain guidelines in there. They hold schools accountable for following the rules of IDEA and treating students with disabilities fairly. So these are to help the school and the family to work together, and to then, whatever the school is proposing to do to help the children, help your child, that they're doing it with following the procedures that are outlined in IDEA and any of the state laws as well, which is actually called Chapter 14 in Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. It's also to promote parental participation, because in the procedural safeguards, it gives the parents the right to be involved in all the decisions regarding their child's identification. So if you're just getting an evaluation done because maybe, your child just started school, maybe you guys are seeing something happening that just doesn't seem right. Maybe the teachers see something as well. They also can come to the family and say, it might be a good idea if your child, maybe we can do an evaluation to. Now, the teachers will also always try other methods before even getting to that point. But if there are things, it is their job to identify students who might need some special education services. And then throughout that whole process, you identify, you evaluate, does the child qualify or not? And then there's placement. So that's always the last point to talk about in your, and gives you your rights throughout that whole process. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole process with you tonight. I'm just trying to highlight certain areas, but I do want everybody to know that you will get a copy of this PowerPoint, and there are certain handouts or certain forms that I'm going to reference, like there's an annotated version of the NOREP and the IEP that you'll get the handouts for that as well. Next slide, please. And another reason for the procedural safeguards is to provide notice and consent so that parents know before what the school makes it, whenever they're ready to make a change, or if just to give consent for certain actions. So, for example, I was talking, if it's the first time you're getting an evaluation, you have to actually give consent for the special education services to start. Otherwise, they won't be starting at all. And that's only for the initial evaluation. And so, but then there's other actions that could occur throughout the school year. There might be changes within your child. Maybe there's different behavioral changes, or maybe something happened, in school or at home. And, you need to come together to kind of talk about, okay, well, how can we better support this child? Maybe, and if it is behaviors, maybe there's different actions that's being suggested, like a functional behavior assessment, things like that. So you might need to give consent. Now that is actually for an evaluation, because that's considered an evaluation, but they could also write it in a prior written notice. It's interesting because I work with so many districts across the state, and some districts utilize the forms for almost everything that they do. And then there's other districts that, they only give it for when they're changing placement or when they're doing different things. I mean, now, technically, depending on what they're doing, they probably should give a prior written notice. But it's very interesting to see all the districts across the state. So it can be very confusing sometimes as families, and when you're navigating all of this. So that's why it's important to reflect back on your procedural safeguards, utilize the Appeal Center and other agencies that are out there to help you understand and navigate all this. Pennsylvania's Training and Technical Assistance Network is a wonderful resource for families and professionals to use. Many districts utilize a lot of what they offer as well. And they offer things not just for professionals, but for families as well. It's a very comprehensive technical assistance network across Pennsylvania that's overseen by the Bureau of Special Education. Next slide, please. And I know I'm throwing probably a lot of terms and things out, so I'm trying to remember my acronyms and telling you what they are, so that if there's any questions. But if I miss one, please, feel free to put that in the chat. Another piece to the procedural safeguards is that you'll see that there's they give you the options around facilitating dispute resolution. So sometimes families and school districts might not come to an agreement. And so the families have the right to utilize different formal processes to resolve these disagreements. And that could be through things like an informal meeting, which is one of the options on, and I think I'm going to get more into that when you get the form. But there's also mediation and then due process hearing. Now, I always suggest to families, you never go to due process unless you really, you really want to try and resolve things before that, because once you get into a due process hearing, it involves lawyers. Like, you do need a lawyer. And then what I typically say is it's lawyer against lawyer. And sometimes what misses is the child. They miss what's happened. Why are we doing, we're here for the child, but many times it's just this lawyer and this lawyer. And I feel like it just gets a little too messy. So that's just what I've experienced and seen over the years. But sometimes you do need to, some districts or families have to utilize that process. So it is there as an option. And it's to ensure confidentiality too, to require the students and the family's information is confidential as well. So that's really important to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So let me get into the prior written notice and the NOREP. So what exactly is it? Well, it must be provided for any student eligible for special education. So that initial evaluation, when a child is being evaluated for the very first time, and that evaluation shows that the child does qualify for an IEP, the district must give you that prior written notice, explaining what they're going to do. I was just in a meeting, actually it was for my great nephew, and he just got identified from his initial evaluation. They wrote up that IEP for him, so I was helping my niece and guiding her through that whole process. And I said to her, I said, when they issue that NOREP, you're going to need to sign that, because otherwise all those services that they talked about are not going to start until you sign that for that initial evaluation. Now, after that, there are reevaluation timelines. So when those reevaluations are done, or when those evaluations are completed, the services are still continuing, but it's not, so you don't have to worry that, oh my God, they're doing a reevaluation, will those services stop? No, it keeps on going. That IEP is a fluid document all the way until the student exits, or maybe the student, quote unquote, graduates from an IEP, depending on what they're getting, services for. But even at that point, the district must give you notice with that prior written notice. Now, when you get that prior written notice, you have the right to disagree with the school at any time they propose or refuse to make any changes to the IEP. So many times, districts are issuing them, especially if you are discussing changes within that IEP. So maybe you're discussing a goal. So, you write a goal on an IEP for a whole year, but maybe the student, meets that goal halfway through the year. So you may need to reconvene, review those goals, write a new goal if that's what, is going to be expected. Maybe they need to add a different accommodation for them, or, whatever might change. So they need to issue that prior written notice to say, do you agree with these changes? And okay, I think I was just about to repeat myself. I'm reading this. It looks like, okay. It looks like we kind of repeated ourselves on those 2 bullets there too. But again, so this form is really important. And sometimes, I'm just going to throw that out there. It's very important to go through that whole prior written notice, because, and it can be a little confusing too, because, and I don't have the questions in my brain, memorized, I should say, but sometimes they contradict each other. So it's like a question of, why are they doing this? And they give you the why, but then they tell you, another reason why. And so it can get confusing. So that's why it's really important to ask the school to review it with them. That's what they're there for. The school personnel, the administrators, they're there to help and work together with the family to review this so that you can understand exactly what's being written on there. And then you have other resources as well to find out, what exactly am I signing here? Okay, next slide, please. I'm going through my little notes here. I want to make sure I'm capturing everything. Okay, so a little bit more about this form. Oh, okay. I just saw it popped up. So Joelle's already given you the annotated forms. Thank you, Joelle. Appreciate that. So yes, those annotated forms are really, really good, because what those annotated forms do is they go through each section of the form, and it kind of tells you what should be written in there. What are some questions maybe you can even ask, things like that. So that is really helpful in that process of understanding what is this form. So it does, so that's the purpose, right? That is the purpose of this NOREP prior written notice, is to explain what the school's proposed actions or decisions are about any of these services for your child. It also serves as a written record of the school's recommendations and the basis for those decisions, because they say what the action is going to be, and then how did they make those decisions? Why did they make those decisions? How is it based on? Did they, was there a reevaluation that had new information in there, and that's why they needed to make these changes? Was there, concerns from the family, and that's why they need to make some of these changes? So that all of that is written on those forms. And it's also to ensure the procedural safeguards, provides parents with that written notice so that you understand what is happening with your child's education, and to make sure that families know it is important for them to agree or disagree. And it's okay to disagree. I mean, sometimes, you have varying opinions, but sometimes, you can come to the table and come to another agreement when you utilize those other dispute resolution options. So, next slide, please. So, I am reiterating myself here a little bit about the purpose of the NORAP, because it is to propose or to initiate the change of a child's value identification, evaluation, or their educational placement. So let me talk a little bit about the educational placement, because when you go through your IEP, especially at your annual meeting, right? You go through the whole IEP. At the very end, you say, okay, we wrote all these goals, we wrote all these accommodations. Now, where is the best place to ensure that we can actually do these? What is the placement? Does that mean that the child's in a regular education classroom with supports and services? Is it in a different type of classroom? Are they being pulled out for different services? So that would be at the very end. You talk about things like that. Now, also at the end, you're talking about, when you're talking about placement, you're talking about, the least restrictive environment, LRE. So where is the least restrictive environment, and helping that child to be able to meet those goals and accommodations that are in this IEP for the student to make meaningful progress. And that is the key. The child needs to be making meaningful progress. And if the child's not making meaningful progress, then we need to look at, do we need to change a goal? Do we need to look at accommodations? Do we need to look at the placement? So all of these questions, as an IEP team, which is the school and the parent, are talking through all of that. And in the end, the district then will issue that NORAP. If the school is refusing to make a certain change, that would be another reason why they would be issuing this NORAP or prior written notice. And then the other thing is, and I'm not sure if I included it in one of my slides here, but it also is to allow the school district to respond to any requests that a parent might have. So, for example, parents have the right to request an independent educational evaluation, an IEE. And they have the right to request that when the school district does their reevaluation or even the initial evaluation, but when the district does an evaluation. So let's say the family, they feel like, this really didn't cover everything, or I don't think it's really shows who my child is. And they might have various other reasons too, but they can request this independent evaluation. The school district must utilize this prior written notice form to say, yes, we're going to approve that, or no, we're not. So this prior written notice form, again, has many purposes to it, but it's a really important to have families try and understand this form so that they can respond on these forms, whether they agree or disagree, and the various. And I think I have my next slide might be the time. I know we're going to get into the timelines too, so I just wanted to tell you about that. But I always jump ahead of my slides, so I'm going to hold off on the timelines until I get to that. But then the last bullet here is, and I think I said this earlier, is that this form's also used when your child is exiting special education services. So, and it will explain to the parent the reasoning for that child exiting special education services. Next slide, please. So, before you sign that NORAP and prior written notice, many things you want to check on there. The first thing is you want to make sure that basic information's on there, right? Make sure your child's name on there, and the date, and the school information, like everything, the demographics is important. And then check whether the action is a proposal or a refusal and that it matches what you discussed at the IEP meeting. So here's when I said earlier, it's one of the objectives. Many of these decisions are made at the IEP meeting. So that's why the IEP is connected with this NOREP and prior written notice, because it is the outcome of that meeting and the things that you discuss with that IEP. So they do relate to each other. So that's where that importance comes in. And you want to read those description of action very carefully. And does it clearly explain what will change? So again, was the conversation about services? Was it about placements? Was it about supports? What was it about? And is it clearly explaining that on there? Because maybe it just doesn't make sense the way it was written, right? So, and that's okay to ask questions. That's why it's important for everyone to review it to make sure that it really reflects what was that conversation we had at that IEP meeting. Does it really pinpoint and respond to what we decided upon as a team? Okay. Next slide, please. Just making sure I'm hitting all my points here. So before signing, you want to understand the why, the reason that there is one section which is about the why. Does it connect to actual data? Because it does have to say, how did they make this decision? Why are we making this decision? Was it due to progress reports that were presented? Was it due to an evaluation that was presented or an assessment? Things like that. So it does relate to, and it'll have that on there, the why. And confirm the basis for decision, list every report. So you also want to make sure that you request copies of anything that you haven't seen. So if the why says, there was a particular evaluation and maybe you didn't see that evaluation, or a particular assessment and maybe you didn't see that data, it's okay to ask, I didn't get that. Or maybe, it's okay for families to ask questions. That's the process. That is why this is a process. It's a conversation between the district and the families to try and make sure that they're doing everything correctly and together as a team. Next slide, please. And if it isn't written down, it doesn't exist. So I always tell families, even if you have a verbal conversation, and this is good for school personnel too. When you have verbal conversations, it's good to maybe follow up with an email to say, thank you for chatting today. Here's what we talked about, things like that. If you did talk about something at the IEP meeting and maybe it's not on the prior written notice, then you want to maybe follow up with that as well. Because because you might just assume, oh, they gave me this, I need to sign it, right? But it's always good to double check because we're all human. Humans make mistakes, right? So you always want to make sure and double check that as well. And so, again, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. So next slide, please. And before you sign it, make sure you consider all of those factors. If there's a blank section, should it be filled out or shouldn't it? Again, ask for details. It's really important. Even reflect back on that annotated version of that NOREP prior written notice, because that'll help you. Does this section need to be filled in all the time? Because sometimes not all of them have to be filled in depending on what the action is. And look at all those factors that are listed. Is it, are they accurate? Are they relevant? Did they include something that really doesn't pertain? Maybe they're writing something about the attendance and there was nothing discussed at the IEP about attendance. Maybe it was just about the child, got a new diagnosis or health or something that had nothing to do with attendance. So sometimes you just want to make sure, is it really relevant for that to even be on there? Next slide, please. And then you really want to review the parent consent section. And I always ask families, and even schools when we're, and sometimes when I'm supporting families, I want to make sure that they, I know sometimes families and schools want to sign the forms right away. Sometimes at that meeting, they want to sign them right away. Well, and that might be okay, but just make sure you take the time to read it thoroughly, or you go through it together thoroughly. If you need that form signed that day, which you really don't, because you have the right, you have 10 calendar days. And of course, that's going to be on a slide ahead, but I'm already jumping the gun. So in 10 calendar days, you have 10 calendar days to make that decision. So you really don't have to sign it that day. But let's say it's a certain support that you want started as quickly as possible. You could consider that, as long as everything's working, you're working well together as a team, and you're okay with that. Make sure you keep a copy of the signed NOREP and prior written notice. Now, I will say that the copies, you might need to request that from the school district, because a lot of times the schools send those electronic documents and they don't always give a copy of the signed document to the parent electronically. So sometimes you have to request that. So different districts use different, like some use DocuSign, some use e-signature. I think there's different ones that they use out there. So, and I will tell you that I sit on the statewide special education advisory panel, and it's been brought to the Bureau that some of these forms that are sent electronically aren't parent friendly, to say the least. So sometimes even just downloading the document, the whole document doesn't let them sign it, or half of it comes, so there's just been a lot of, I'm just going to say, there's been a lot of problems with them statewide. So that's why we want to remind everyone that, always get a copy of it, even if you have to ask for it after you've done it. Maybe everything worked well, but you didn't get that copy of it. Just ask for it. The school district will give it to you. It is your right to have your signed copy. Or, be old school like me, print it out, sign it, go to school, when they get that stamp on there, that's when you hand it in. And then remember, you'll get your procedural safeguards many times with that. And there are those dispute options on there that you can utilize. You can utilize the informal meeting. You can utilize mediation, and you can utilize the due process hearing. And all of that is offered through the Office of Dispute Resolution. So, and they offer other alternative dispute resolution options. I know this doesn't have to do with the form, but they even offer something called IEP facilitation. So they offer a independent facilitator that can come to your IEP meetings, and they just kind of keep the flow of the meeting going, right? They're there to maybe, keep a timing on, okay, well, we're going to talk about this particular topic for this amount of time. And they're also there to make sure everybody's voice is heard, so that, the teachers, the therapists, the families, everybody has their voice in those meetings. So that's always another option too, that you can utilize, that the Office of Dispute Resolution offers. And it's at no cost to families and to no cost to districts as well. So those processes are really helpful because of that. Except if you have to go to due process, then it's going to cost the lawyers. And that does cost families, and it does cost districts. So that's the other reason why you want that as a last resort if needed. Next slide, please. So just making sure you have everything straight. If you disagree or need clarification, write comments on the form, because many times you might agree with one piece and not the other, but you want it implemented. Okay, well then write that on there. Or just, again, utilize the informal meeting option that's on the IEP, because an informal meeting is just that. It's not another IEP meeting where everybody has to come to the table. It is exactly that. It's an informal meeting where many times it might be just, a principal, a special ed supervisor or director, and they're meeting with the family to kind of answer whatever questions you might have before you actually sign the document. An informal meeting, also, if you check that off, must be scheduled as soon as possible. So like when the district receives that, they're going to be calling you or emailing you to get that scheduled as soon as possible, because that's part of the procedures of what the school district needs to do, is to schedule that as soon as possible. And again, it's really important for you to fully understand every part of that form. Next slide, please. So when you do disagree with any of the proposed changes, I've already talked about, see, I'm jumping slides. I've already talked about the informal meeting with the school personnel. The second option is mediation. So mediation, and all of this is on ODR website, the Office of Dispute Resolution, and I can make sure that I send that information as well when I send the follow-up information to you guys to send out to all our participants tonight. But mediation is voluntary. So it's voluntary for the family, it's voluntary for the school district. It's at no cost to the school district, it's at no cost to the families. It is with an independent facilitator that the Office of Dispute Resolution uses, and they are there only to try and get an agreement between both sides. So they are there to facilitate conversation from the family member and then conversation from the district, and to try and get a resolution. So their job is to try and get a signed mediation agreement between both sides at the end of that mediation. So it's very powerful, because in that way you're making those decisions that day. Mediation, that mediation document that you both sign, that's a legal document as well. So when you guys do come to an agreement at a mediation, that document is legal and the district will need to follow it as well. So it's just as powerful as the IEP. But that mediator does not make the decision. They're only there to facilitate that conversation. And many times, if families initiate that mediation, the Appeal Center is there to help them and guide them through that process. But just to give you a kind of snippet, is that many times mediators will call the district and they will call the family before it, just to kind of go over the rules and what it's going to be like and things like that. One of the things that, if the family requested the mediation, is many mediators will turn to the family to start the mediation since they initiated it. And it's really good for families, and I always do encourage families to write up a opening statement. So to make sure that all your thoughts, get everything in a manner, because it's emotional, right? Even when we go to IEP meetings, it's emotional. I remember, it's about my child, it's emotional. This way, it's all written out. You can be clearly to talk about what are the, tell a little bit about your child, because the mediator might not know them. And so it could just give them a little snippet. What happened and why are we here today? And what would you like? So because the district's listening to all that, they're taking notes throughout all of that, and then they will respond. So just to kind of give you an idea of what that process is like. And then you may or may not come up to an agreement in the end. But if you do, again, you will sign it that day, and it is legally binding as well. And then the last process is that due process. So the due process hearing is an option for you, right? It is a way to utilize another one of your rights. Now that is where a hearing officer is assigned, and that hearing officer makes the decision. So the hearing officer, you get hearing dates. Now there is what's called a resolution session, like you have one more chance to have a resolution with the district. You go through that. Do we have to go to due process? And maybe you can resolve it at that resolution session. But if not, then that hearing officer is going to be planning all these dates. And then they, it's court, basically. They're listening to the sides, and that's when all the lawyers, do all that stuff. And it's not pleasant for anybody on either side. And again, Is it about the child sometimes? But like I said, sometimes they are important, right? I mean, there are things that have happened because, out of lawsuits and different things like that. So sometimes, depends on what it is. Sometimes you do need to take that avenue. So, but certainly take it with a lot of thought. Next slide, please. Timelines. Okay. So I talked about this a little while ago, but whether you agree or disagree, parents have 10 calendar days to sign and return that NORAP. And it is 10 calendar days from the date on the NORAP that you count. Now, interestingly enough, I actually posed this question to the Bureau of Special Education recently, and they haven't answered me yet. They're supposed to be answering me on this because sometimes the district, they put a date on that, but if they're mailing it, some families get it in 2 to 3 days later or something like that, depending on that. So is it when the parent actually receives it in the mail, or is it the date on the thing? Now, the electronic ones, right, they're getting it automatically. You're getting it that day. So I said to the Bureau, what is it? Is it the date on the, because my understanding what it was, but somebody was challenging that recently. So I said, well, let me check with the Bureau. So I can come back to you guys with that answer. But my understanding was always it's what's on the NORAP. So 10 calendar days, and that includes weekends because it's calendar days. It includes holidays. So if you get it right before one of your winter breaks or spring breaks or whatever, count the 10 days because it's probably either going to be due before you go on vacation or right after. So be very clear about that as well, looking at your calendar. And many times that 10 calendar days is also very important because if you are if you're just all right, I just lost my train of thought because I I saw something pop up in the chat. I started reading that. I was like, wait a minute. So the 10 calendar days is important because if you do not respond, that's where I was going with this. If you do not respond within that 10 calendar days, the district will implement what's in there. So that's why your 10 calendar days is important. Okay. So if they're planning to implement something, make changes, and it's written on that NORAP, and if you don't send it in, that does mean consent. Okay. So that's why I always do stress that 10 calendar days to families. Now, okay, I think that was all I had on that. Next slide, please. Okay. Now let me talk about pendency. So if the NORAP is about placement, because again, remember that NORAP, that prior written notice, is about changes. It's about all kinds of different things, right? But if this particular NORAP that you get is about placement, and let's say, for example, the district is offering or suggesting a placement that you don't agree on, okay? And you want your child to stay where they're at. Very important, again, making sure that you sign, you disagree, and that you, why you disagree, because they do have that on there as well. And you must check off either mediation or due process in order to keep what's called pendency. To keep the placement that your child is in, you need to also check off one or the other. Okay. So that gives you pendency. And then so that child stays, whatever that placement is, until there's an agreement. Okay. So if you did check off mediation, your child stays in that placement until you have that mediation meeting. Or again, if you have the due process. So, and all of that is always scheduled through the Office of Dispute Resolution. So I just wanted to make sure it's just not enough just to check off you disagree. And here's the other thing. I always get a lot of families, they'll call me and they might be upset about something and they got the NORP and they say, and I'm not going to sign nothing. I'm not signing. I'm not going to sign nothing. And I said, okay, but let me help you understand what your rights are. Because if you don't sign anything, then, this means that what they're proposing is going to go into action. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. And I'm like, oh, yeah. So let's read through it. And then I, guide them through what all their options and processes are. So, and here, and I do have on here the website for ODR that you can go to and see everything that they offer. And they explain everything too on their website as well. So if there's anything here tonight that I'm explaining, feel free to go to ODR's website, because they also have some really nice videos as well to kind of talk through each of the processes. Because mediation, there's two different types of mediations. There's a facilitated mediation and there's an evaluative mediation. So it's like, well, what's the difference? So there's these videos that tell you what the difference is. So yeah, so I do suggest for you to check out ODR's website as well. Okay, next slide, please. And I know you guys were monitoring the chat. I know there's been a few things popped up, but if there's nothing like pressing, I'll address everything in the chat when I'm done too, if that's okay. But if you want me to address something now, Reba or whoever was looking at the chat, is there something I need to address, anything right now, or are we good?
I don't think it's urgent, but it is regarding pendency. Just what if it's the opposite? If you're trying to move them and the district wants to keep them put, is there a term for that, or is it the same process? Is it a different word? Does that make sense?
So
in terms of pendency?
So the question is that if you want your child moved to a different placement than what the district is offering?
Yes. Like if the district is trying to keep them put and you want them to be changed. Because
Well,
the
yeah,
opposite is pendency, correct? Like you're trying to verify pendency, or
well,
whatever we're talking, whatever the words are.
Right. I hear what you're saying, but so what happens in a case like that is, like, if your child, they want the child to stay where they're at, right? Is that what you're saying? And
Yes.
the parent wants them moved into a different type of placement.
Correct.
So the district would be issuing a prior written notice for what they believe is the placement, right? And
Right.
if you disagree, which it sounds like you would disagree with what they have, I mean, it depends, right? I mean, yeah, pendency is still there because you still have to disagree and go through the process of mediation or due process. So the placement continues to be where it's at until you come to an agreement.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. You probably said it better. Pendency would be the last agreed upon placement. Yeah, that makes it more clear.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Okay, so as a parent center, your advocacy, and as a parent, your advocacy at school matters, right? So it really is good. I'm glad everybody's here tonight because you're here to get that knowledge, right? Whether you're the role of a parent, administrator, teacher, whatever your role is, understanding the processes is always very important. And it's always good to clarify your concerns as a parent as well. Share your thoughts with the school and the IEP team. Share them early, because you don't want to, something's happening or you think something's going to happen, talk about it before it bubbles into something that, is too hard to try to untangle. And, one thing I've always, many times at many of the presentations I do, is I always feel it's important for families to have what's called a vision for their child. That vision for your child is so important to stay focused on that, because again, this IEP, these processes, the root of everything is that child and that child's success and that child to be making meaningful progress. what does that mean to you as a family for your child? You know, I always shared every year at David's annual IEP meetings, I wrote David's vision. And, you know, I always started David's vision. The first line was always, David will be a tax-paying citizen, because it was important to us as a family that everybody recognize that he will be a tax-paying citizen, which means what? He's going to have a job. He's going to pay taxes. He's going to live that everyday life that all of us do try to strive for. And to get to that, sometimes he might, you might need to go to college, or, you know, so I wanted those high expectations for my son, because many times, because he had some complex needs, I felt that sometimes there were team members throughout, you know, our journey that maybe didn't have those high expectations that we had for our son. So that vision is always very important to have those high expectations. And how we get there is how those school and the families, they all work collaboratively together. You're working to have your child included, to, you know, to make sure that they have those supports there for them. You know, our journey for David was, you know, we had ups and downs as well with our district. It happens. You're going to have good years and bad years, whether they have a disability or not. You're going to have good years and bad years in school. So, but it's really important to stay focused on that vision and what that vision is for your child. I always like to share the story about, and I'm sorry if any of you have heard my story about David and the driving. David always wanted to drive. And as a parent, I wasn't quite sure with his complex needs, whether or not, you know, driving would be in his future. And I certainly knew the school wasn't too sure about that either, but I said to the team, it's not up to me or anyone to crush that dream for him. If he wants to drive, then let's teach him how to drive. So when he was in high school, he took like driver's ed, and they were working with him. They would go online and do those tests online, you know, practice tests and everything. Well, next thing, and he's reading the book. He had the book at home. He was reading the book. I don't know if they still have those books on it, because everything's online. But anyway, he had the book. There was the driver book. Well, he started passing some of those tests online. And all of a sudden, all of us were like, oh no, he's passing these online tests. Oh dear. So, you know, I had to start having those conversations with him. All right, you're going to have to go get your permit test next. You know, you have to go to the driver center and you get your permit and, you know, all that and everything. Well, eventually he just kind of lost interest. But the purpose of all of that is that David was reading that book. We had those expectations. He made the decision. I'm not so sure I want to drive now. You know, I'm not so sure I want to go take that test. So, but it was up to him, and he made that decision. It wasn't any of us doing that. So, you know, I share that story on very different levels, because I also like to share everything he learned along the way around reading and you know, navigating his community, and just like all of those various things. And anytime he's in the car with me, he knows he is very good direction. So but I can still say that he's not had the angst to want to get his driver's license anymore either. So we got Uber now. Works just as good. So anyway, I digressed a little bit. Next slide, please. So that leads me to questions and discussion. So let me look in the, but before we do that, can you go to the next slide for me? Because let me just go a little bit over with about Peel, because we're on social media. The only thing I'm on is Facebook. I don't really do any of those others, but lots of people are on social media, right? So Peel is too. So if you want to, you know, get any of our local events, information, or more, we have a conference coming up next weekend. Was not this weekend, next weekend. We're having the Next Gen Conference at Arcadia University. So check out our website for that. If you're not signed up, please sign up for that. We got some great presenters coming. And we have a youth strand going on too. So it's going to be a good time together. Next slide, please. So I talked earlier about the Peel Center being a federally funded program. So because of that, we have to tell our funders, how are we doing? Things like that. So I do encourage anyone, if you can now, if you have a phone or an iPad or something, and you can do our evaluation. If not, when I send the PowerPoint, it'll be on there, and you can always go to the link and you can do it that way as well. So you'll be getting it either way. But we do appreciate anyone that can fill that out. And it always asks the name of the training, and you can just put NOREP/prior written notice. And then I think just one more slide after that about the Peel Center and how you can reach us. So, and we are celebrating 20 years this year as well. So very exciting news about the Peel Center about that as well. So I've been with them about half that time, but I will say before they went, because they were in Pittsburgh only for the first 10 years, and then they got the grant when it went statewide. So I started working with them as soon as it went statewide. So I became their Philadelphia area person at the time. So, but yeah, and we have and I didn't say that earlier. We have an office in Pittsburgh and an office in Philly, and then we have my colleagues are all spread out throughout the state as well. With all the work that we do. So I think that's it with the PowerPoint. So let me now, I don't know if you guys want to shut off the recording. We can do the questions and answers without it being recorded. It's totally up to you guys. But let's see here. Okay, so Joelle shared some really good information